Welcome.
Welcome.
Welcome to First Parish Unitarian Universalists of Arlington.
We choose
to be
A liberal religious community,
welcoming.
welcoming to all.
We encourage each other
on our spiritual journeys.
Support one another
through the changes in our lives
And challenge the excesses
and injustices of our time.
called to love,
to love.
and upheld by joy.
We live our faith.
Now today you're going to see a very short play. And the theme of that play is tradition. And this was a skit that was written by one of Marta's congregants from many decades ago. And we're bringing it back. And this first scene in this play happens in a family kitchen 50 years ago.
Grandpa, what are you doing?
Well, Tricia, I'm making the Talikas family traditional raisins. The traditional family raisin spice cake.
Are you always the one who makes the raisin spice cake?
Well, I'm making it now, but my Aunt Polly used to make it before me, and her father baked it until he was almost 90.
Wow. Can I bake the Talikas family traditional raisin spice cake someday?
Of course you can, Tricia.
Great. Well, can I have the recipe, Grandpa?
No.
Oh.
The recipe isn't written down. You'll just have to watch me. But you'll learn really by doing it yourself someday. And remember, you have to bake this traditional raisin spice cake whenever the Talikas family gets together. Weddings, Thanksgiving, funerals.
Right. Well, what did you just do?
Well, I added some flour.
How much? A cup?
Well, I'm making two cakes, so I added more.
Well, how much more? And what did you just do?
Well, that's some sugar. You have to have sugar. Yeah.
How much?
Not too much.
Oh, okay. What? Well, Grandpa, you're just going too fast. Wow, you put in a whole lot of raisins.
Well, raisins are good for you, and it is called the Talikas family raisin spice cake.
Now we're traveling in time, and now it's the present day in the same kitchen.
Aunt Tricia, what are you doing? Oops.
I'm baking the Talikas family traditional raisin spice cake for your sister's wedding.
Oh, can I bake it someday?
Of course you can, Sanjay.
Well, where's the recipe?
Well, it's not written down. You have to learn it by watching it and then doing it yourself.
Okay. Are those spices that you're adding?
Oh, yes. I'm putting in some cloves and some cinnamon and some ginger, a little bit of nutmeg.
But how much are you using, Aunt Tricia?
Oh, you know when you've used enough.
Aunt Tricia,
Yeah?
if this is the Talikas family traditional raisin spice cake, why did you only add 5 raisins?
You're making me think about my grandfather, who used a lot of raisins in this cake.
But then this is a different cake.
No, Sanjay, no. I'm baking the Tolucas family traditional raisin spice cake for sure. It's just that, Sanjay, I'm going to tell you something that I had to learn by myself, and you will too, which is that everybody in the family who bakes the Tolucas family traditional raisin spice cake makes it their own way. The important thing is that when we gather as a family on special occasions, that's what matters. That's when we renew our bonds and feel the love that we share. Somebody bakes a cake and we eat it, but it's the sharing and the love that is the real family tradition. Do you understand?
I think so. It means when I bake the Tolucas family traditional raisin spice cake, I can add a lot of raisins. I like raisins.
Exactly.
Today is the first Sunday in Lent and the 9th day of Ramadan. Purim begins on Thursday evening. The holidays of world faiths often occur in response to the movements of the sun and the moon. And so if we are paying attention, we know that the nights are growing brighter and the days are longer. Soon the deep purple of crocuses will appear, then too the yellow daffodils. When the cares of our time and our lives weigh heavy on us, it is good to remember. Please join me, if you will, in prayer. Wondrous mystery, which we sense in winds rushing and streams flowing, in the soft breathing of a baby and the gentle smiling of an elder, in the words of poets and the declarations of prophets. You go by many names and many understandings. This day I call you gracious love, gracious for the elegance of life itself, grace for the unearned gift of it all, and love for that spirit that moves among and within us. Gracious love, among us are those mourning this day. Comfort us. Among us are those who feel lost. Guide us. Among us are those confused and uncertain. Steady us. Among us are those who know their days are numbered. The days of those they love are short. Gracious love, delight us with the preciousness of what remains. Gracious love, we give thanks for newfound delights and long-seasoned pleasures, for laughter shared which buoys us, for healings we have known of body and of the spirit, and for new chapters unfolding. How amazing that we can recount gifts even now, when events in our time shake and rock us. We look not away, but toward those in harm's way. The transgender, the undocumented, the federal worker, the ones abroad in need of our aid, the ones stateside in need of health care. We pray for our nation, its leaders, those in the majority and those in the minority. Call them and all of us from self-interest to service, to a task, a cause that we know does not address it all, but is part of a larger fabric of care and repair. Gracious love, remind us of your abiding presence through the joys and the woes of life, of love that has and still eases our way, and of love that calls us to ease the way of others. A quiet comes to us. Together, let us sit for 2 minutes in a loving, prayerful silence.
In December, my wife, Liz, and I joined my parents attending a holiday tradition around here that stretches back for decades, the Christmas revels. While I might have been dragged along as a kid, this was Liz's first time, so in part, I saw it through her eyes. Held in Sanders Theater on the Harvard University campus each December, the Revels is a stage theater and singing and dance performance themed around a folk story and the winter solstice. Now, the MC that night, David Coffin, was a generous host, explaining to newcomers the different customs of the revels, and briefly teaching us the songs and shouts we join in. I don't think Liz expected it to be so participatory, and we gladly joined in, especially enjoying the performance of one of First Parish's own, the young adult Sam Fleischman. But intermission tested our buy-in to the tradition. At intermission, and apparently this happens every year, everyone's singing Lord of the Dance. Dance then wherever you may be, I am the Lord of the dance, said he. Surely, Liz and I love this song from our post-Vatican II Catholic upbringings, and we're singing. But on verse 2, everyone starts to rise up out of their seats, holding hands, and proceeds to dance their way to the lobby. All around us, smiling, warm faces, mostly of our parents' generation, so kindly inviting us. And Liz and I stayed in our seats, politely declining. We stayed on the sidelines for that part of the tradition, and we weren't necessarily the only ones. As we sat and watched the merriment, I was vaulted into imagining some possible future. If Liz and I would have attended the ceremony regularly, that we'd jump right into the merriment. That it would be a comfort and a source of joy for us. Perhaps. But this year, this time, we were new. And we were still newcomers to a tradition that meant so much to the people around us. When have you been a newcomer to traditions? The first holiday meal at your in-laws or your best friend's family? All the customs at a new school or workplace? Or perhaps your first time at Sunday worship here at First Parish Arlington, whether that's today or 30 years ago. Our experiences as newcomers to tradition may be a mixed bag, or indeed quite difficult. These birth pangs of belonging. Wanting to know what you're supposed to do and what you're supposed to say. Feeling some hollowness or superficiality in the moment or comparing it to what you have known before. Or perhaps not catching that as the sociologist of religion Emil Durkheim termed the collective effervescence that emerges when a community all joins in a ritual together. So too, just with the birth pangs, there are graces that help us bridge the gap of this discomfort and difficulty of a new tradition. The conscientious leader who makes the how-to of the ritual very clear. That glimmer of connection we might feel from a smile or an understanding look. Or perhaps remembering why we originally sought this new experience anyhow. Today, let us linger in a space of reflection upon our traditions. I especially draw our attention towards things that we do over and over again together in community that carry meaning for us all. So when you hear me say the word tradition today, that's what I'll be referring to. A family, group, or community's common rituals that carry meaning. Anything from baking and eating a delicious family recipe handed down through generations, or a child dedication ceremony. These traditions carry powerful constitutive effects that shouldn't be overlooked. For example, and just in about 10-15 minutes, at First Parish we have our benediction words. May faith in the spirit of life, hope for the community of earth, and love of the sacred in one another be ours now and in all the days to come. These we repeat together every Sunday at the end of every service, often hand in hand, or our arms stretched out at the Zoom meeting, or hands on our shoulders if that's more comfortable for you in person. And do you perhaps realize that our high schoolers, at the end of every Sunday evening after their candles of joy and sorrow sharing ritual, down in the basement, link their hands to and repeat those benediction words? And many children in our religious education classes will end their sessions with that benediction. And the covenant groups and committees that gather on weekdays here use those same words from time to time. This tradition of saying the benediction together knits our community together. Yes, indeed, the meaning of the words is important. It reminds us of our deeper aspirations together. But in that repetition itself, across years, and I heard from a minister who grew up in our congregation who now works in Philadelphia. They were doing this in the 1980s and 1990s. That tradition and the repetition of it creates an anchor. If you'll permit this visual spatial thinker a little bit of a metaphor, traditions are like a colored ribbon, pierced through layers of fabric that are folded over on itself. A connective thread through the fabric of time. Perhaps most of the time we simply repeat the words, we do the action, we hold the silence. But each instance in a tradition relates back to the others. The time we said the words after losing someone dear, or when we held the hand of someone who returned after some time away, or when the words took on new meaning because of a way that we've grown or changed. Can I posit that each of those instances are alive every time we say the words? Indeed, similarly, when we return to many of our traditions. Now, here at First Parish, not all of our traditions have such longevity, but we have many of them here at First Parish. I'll name a few. Communing our waters from our lives and travels on In-Gathering Sunday in September. Lighting a chalice to set off sacred time for our worships and other gatherings together. Creating with our arms outstretched across the aisle the Arch of Love each spring to celebrate the 8th graders as they come of age. Around Thanksgiving time, telling the story of a person being shown heaven and hell as a world where everyone has long spoons. And if you don't know the whole story, come back in Thanksgiving. Or the youth groupers putting their handprints on the wall in the basement at the end of the year. With traditions, though, we may struggle with the very repetition that makes it so powerful. Quote, "We've always done it this way," starts to feel more constricting than it does grounding. Have you ever bucked against a tradition that felt stale? Or perhaps that felt limiting, or you didn't feel like suited you any longer? The family stuffing recipe when you got diagnosed with celiac disease? Or the repetition of masculine God language in religious services you attend? Traditions that no longer seem to fit into our lives or suit us. In those moments, we might distance ourselves, perhaps in self-protection. It may feel like we don't have agency in shaping those traditions. Here at First Parish, or in our families, in our communities, in our lives, what agency do we have in shaping tradition? The field of religious studies, which is a rambunctious mix of theology and history and philosophy and sociology and more lately neuroscience, theorizes about the nature of tradition and its power to form and transform communities. Sociologists like Emile Durkheim and W.B. Du Bois in the 20th century examined how traditions work to establish the moral norms of a society, and how traditions could help in the preservation of a culture amidst oppression. They point to important aspects of tradition, that they happen in groups, that they have something to do with our bodies, not just our minds, and that they can be transmitted through time. As these religious studies get more precise, or perhaps broadening the variety of traditions that they studied, that role of transmission itself became an exciting sight of seeing tradition as something more elastic than rigid. I could get into the French sociologists, but I think their findings can be summarized by the work of conceptual artist Sol LeWitt in the work Wall Drawing 797, of which I've asked you to do a replica here in your order of services. Sol LeWitt is a 20th century American artist who, among many things, created a series of geometric, quote, wall drawings that he created by writing directions for the creation of his pieces. So for example, in drawing 797, his directions are, so the first drafter has a black marker and makes an irregular horizontal line across the top of the wall. Then the second drafter tries to copy it without touching it using a red marker. And the third drafter does the same with a yellow marker, and then the fourth drafter again with a blue marker, and then the second drafter again with their red marker, yellow, blue, on and on. If you're here at First Parish today, I commend you to look at the ramp up to the minister's offices. We've been working on a version of this piece right there. And if you're online, Googling Wall Drawing 797, we'll show you an example. But that direction, the second drafter tries to copy it. I think this is the crucial direction. When I was undertaking trying to take part in this collective art piece, my own experience trying to replicate that line became itself a study in futility. There simply is no way we will replicate what has come before us. My cramping hand, or the flow of the ink in the marker, or a little moment of distraction led to a variation in the copying. So too, when we practice traditions, we put our own spin on things almost naturally. It's part of how we tend them. Think of the lovely skit from our Time for All Ages, with the newest generation determining just how many raisins they wanted in their raisin spice cake. But each of those variations in the replication means that the next drafter, the next carry-on of tradition, will seek to copy what came before them, including that variation or that mistake. I think about this like a game of telephone. We rarely have reference back to the original clue. And if I can make an aside from the field of religious studies, even traditions that claim to refer back to a fundamental or original time carry much of the traces of their current moment. Indeed, these lines of transmission become our chance to play with, parody, or shape what has come before us. There are bounds to this, yes. I imagine this wall drawing is perhaps like parenting, or uncling and aunting, or teaching. We are always passing on a little bit of replication for what we were handed down. Or perhaps in important ways, pushing back against some way the tradition fell short. I find hope in this dynamism, that it's both our responsibility to tend tradition and to adapt it to the current moment. Unitarian Universalists have a phrase for this. And spoilers, it's written on your gray hymnal, the living tradition. We have reason to hope that our traditions, and perhaps more appropriately put, the deeper values and meaning that undergird our coming together, can withstand change. Over 10 years ago, this community of First Parish made a change to one of its long-held traditions. We started placing stones, as we did, instead of lighting candles. If you're a newcomer, you would have got a clue from the music that Ken played during placing of stones. It's still titled Candle Music. Celebrations and concerns is such a rich part of our worship life at First Parish. It's a time to take the many hopes, aspirations, disappointments, griefs, and confusions of our lives and lay them before one another for care. In turn, we witness one another, even if we don't speak those celebrations and concerns aloud, in an affirmation of our common humanity. I have my grief, but I'm not alone. I have this joy, and let me share it. 10 years ago, at least one member here started voicing concerns about the effect of the smoke let off by the 100+ candles lit, and especially the smoke when they are extinguished. That smoke made it impossible to be present in the sanctuary during or after our candle ritual. A chemical sensitivity brought this on. This matter was treated delicately by those who received the concern, both our lead minister, Marta, and our appointed worship associates, who are members of our congregation, trained and tasked with tending the worship life of our community. And because it was deemed more than just a preference, but a medical issue that resulted in inaccessibility, the worship associates began meeting to explore alternatives. What emerged is our stone ritual, a rather elegant alternative that preserved our lining up, the exchange of ritual elements. We are handed stones now by the person before you. Before, it was handing on a taper candle. And even the elementalness, instead of fire, now earth. And the worship associates and minister began trying out this new version of our ritual. once a month, I think, at first, and then with more frequency throughout that spring. In the process, collecting feedback and allowing us as a community to try a new way out. I spoke with several of you this week for your memories of this transition. Someone who was new to the community at the time, and someone who had been coming for ages. Someone who looked out for our safety practices. Someone who was on the team of worship associates, delegated to hold the decision-making. And many remember that time, over 10 years ago, by the hardness of that change for us. I heard about your grief. I heard how candles felt so connected to the tradition of your upbringing that you missed it. I heard about your anger. So too did I hear the gifts the change brought. Without 100+ candles burning in the front, the risk of someone's robe or clothing catching fire greatly reduced. How it alleviated the hours of scraping wax off the floor tiles and altar tables. How handing a stone to someone else, often warming it in your hands before passing it, created a moment of connection that was unavailable when we are so preoccupied by the flame. And it meant that not just the original community member that raised concerns, but in fact, many asthmatics had a better experience in our sanctuary as a result. Our ambivalence collectively over the change still lingers. For perhaps one of you summed it up best. You said, there are things in our congregation that I'm not personally behind, but I'm part of the community, and it's my responsibility to look at all the arguments for and against, and to try to approach every instance of this, reminding myself that everyone is approaching with good intentions. I may not agree, but it doesn't mean that I am right. I tell you, your grief is okay, and missing candles is okay too. And I thank you for making this change that allows more of us to be together in the sanctuary. It drew the circle of community a little wider that day. We face a time with the retirement of our lead minister, Marta, who has helped us tend, create, and care for so many of our traditions, where we will start examining ourselves, coming together democratically to set direction that this community wants to grow in, and calling eventually a new lead minister who we believe can accompany us there. I am curious about how our traditions will bolster us. I know a little something of this. I was hired 2 years ago, and I came in following the long traditions and legacy of Tina Schultz, our former religious educator, who was here for 27 years. And even last year, when I just said to myself, I'm just going to run Tina's program, of course, just as there's no way to copy that line, I left my little impressions, and you received it so tenderly, so carefully, and with such openness. Thank you. But this change and transition that we face will be a chance to deepen and to connect and ground. And I wonder if we can learn lessons from that time 10 years ago or other times when our traditions have changed and adapted, but we still stayed the same. Lessons like that we want to trust one another's intent as we make these decisions together, and that we bring our own best intentions to that work of setting our course. That we speak up when it seems like the circle has not been drawn wide enough. And that we have compassion for ourselves because change of anything we feel close to is hard. We will be in the business of passing on traditions no matter what. It's what we do so much on Sunday morning over in our religious education program, passing on traditions to our children, that dynamic exchange of teaching them our traditions and learning from them a new way. So too, it will be a time when we welcome newcomers and we have to show them the way we do things, hand in hand. But it's not just repeating and passing on traditions for tradition's sake. This is a place that has deep, often countercultural values that we hold together. And our traditions, our rituals, are a manifestation of us, making that real in the world and strengthening our ties to those values that we have. When we commune our waters, a memory, when we commune our waters every September, it's a reminder that we come from many different paths. When we light a chalice, we remember it's important to set off sacred time for ourselves and one another. When we make that arch of love outstretched, we know that it is our responsibility to tend to the next generation. When we hear that story from Thanksgiving with the long spoons, we know that we value reciprocity. And when those youth groupers put their handprints on the wall down in the basement, we're reminded that we're a place that tells young people that they make an impact and legacy and imprint upon the community that they're a part of. We make these values through our traditions, and the traditions instill us a deep connection to those values. So, my people, as we face a time of change, let us tend, adapt, and create new traditions together so that we may be strengthened by the deeper values of which we all commune together about. May that be so.